start now. All right, so colleagues, welcome again. This is our video B to our tutorial orientational class for today, right, in AUI 4861. So from the presentation that I was giving you guys earlier in video part A, I was mentioning to you guys we're going to be discussing a past exam paper for October, November 2019. So that's what we're going to be looking at so that I can, give you guys a perspective of how topic number one, which is the IPPF, how it can be tested in the context of an examination. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So I'm not going to start with question 3 for a reason, but I'm going to start with question number 4 because it's one of the most familiar ones that you guys are familiar with from undergrad level. Right. Then we'll go to question number 3. So question number 3 is something that may appear new, or to a certain extent, it might appear unusual, right? Because you're facing this for the first time. But nonetheless, I'll just read the required part for question 3, but we'll come back to it. Then I'll start with question 4 and then end up with question 3, right? So whenever you get an essay-based question, colleagues, your point of departure is always to start off by looking at the required section of the question so that you understand what the examiner expects of you. It also saves you time. It also helps you to be able to navigate in the system description effectively. So in question 3, for instance, 3.1, they're asking you to scrutinize the charter to identify its deficiencies with reference to the IPPF. You should specify the deficiency and explain why it is a shortcoming. And where appropriate, in order to address the deficiencies, recommend improvements to the charter. Refer to the relevant IAA standards to justify the recommendation that you're going to give. And use the table format below to answer your questions. So the format is outlined as follows. In the first column, you have to indicate the identification, explanation of the deficiency or the shortcoming in the internal audit charter that you would see in the case scenario. In column number 2, they would want you guys to then give the recommendation with reference to the IIA standards where applicable. So whatever you're going to give as a recommendation here, it has to be referenced to the IIA standards, or I normally call it IPPF standards, okay? Right. So yeah, it has to refer to that. But important thing to note is to first unveil or to understand, okay, what do they mean when they say identify a deficiency? When they say identify a shortcoming, what exactly are they referring to? So when you're looking through the required section, that's what you're trying to establish, to understand, to unpack what the examiner is requesting of you in the context of a question. So in this case, here is what it means when they say identify a deficiency or a weakness. So a weakness, a deficiency, it can be also attributed to as a red flag. Now I explain to you what a weakness is, what a deficiency is, what a shortcoming is, or what a red flag is. Okay. So essentially, when they say identify a deficiency, it means identify something that is not being done right, something that is being done wrong. So now, under normal circumstances, it can be as a result of something that is existing, meaning say controls that are existing, but they're not being effected correctly. In other words, they're not being adequate. So when you're saying something is not adequate, it means it's not efficient and it's not being effective to achieve the defined purpose, right? So if I'm looking at the charter, for instance, and then I look at maybe say purpose, authority, and responsibility of the internal audit division, right? And then I look at what they've given as a description of what the purpose, authority, and the responsibility of the internal audit activity is. If it deviates from the blueprint, which is the IIA standards or the IPPF standards, then I know that there's a deficiency there. There's a shortcoming. Why? There's no alignment to the blueprint. So when they're asking of red flags, deficiencies or weaknesses, it's just, something that is not, being done right, or it can be something that is supposed to be there, which is not being effected at all. Hello? Okay. right? So that's what a shortcoming or a deficiency can attribute to. So it can be, just to explain that, I've already just tried to summarize it here. So it can be a signal that something is not being done right, and it can be in form of inadequate controls. It can be in form of poor controls. All right. So if something is inadequate or poor, it's existing, but it's not achieving the purpose. So like, for instance, when you go through the charter, you would look at, for instance, the purpose, authority, and the responsibility of the internal audit, right? I'm just giving that as an example. It's there, but the question is it defined the way it's supposed to be defined? If it is not, it means it's a shortcoming. So that's what I mean when I'm saying that a weakness or a shortcoming, it can be anything like which is considered to be inadequate, in the sense that it's not achieving the desired purpose. It's existing, but not achieving the desired purpose. Then you would have a case, for instance, whereby certain control measures or certain aspects, because here in this case, it's not more controls that we're looking at in the charter, right? But there are certain aspects that should be present in the way that a business operates. So in the context of what you're going to be looking at in the scenario, right? We're looking at an internal audit charter. The internal audit charter should be designed according to the IPPF standards. If you go through standard 1000, right, it explains to you of aspects that should be addressed in the internal audit charter. So if those aspects that are supposed to be there in the internal audit charter are not there, then it means, again, that's a shortcoming. So it can happen in two, just to sum up this aspect. It can be either something is existing, but it's just not being done right. That's number one. Or it can be either that something that was supposed to be done, or that is supposed to be done, it's not being done at all. So that's where we then say something like there's lack of this, or there's non-existing that, or there's no this. In other words, these are like missing, control measures in a way. So those are the two ways that you identify shortcomings. So number one, just to repeat it again, it's either something is being done, but it's not being done, it's not achieving the purpose. Number two, something that is supposed to be done, it's not being done at all. That's another way of identifying a shortcoming. So when I take you through the scenario, you'll be able to, to see some of this and look at the mark allocation for this. And by the way, what we're going to be looking at in the context of this particular question, I think it came last year as one of the assignments, if I'm not mistaken. It was one of the assignments. I believe if it's not last year, it should be 2022. I saw exactly the same question like this in an assignment, and I was like, what? So how did I connect the dots when I saw that? That's when I realized that most of the questions that you get even in the exam, sometimes it can be tested as previous assignments then. Okay. Sometimes questions which were tested in the past exam papers, they can come as your assignments in this current academic year. They would most likely sometimes change the names. They sometimes do that. I'm not saying they always do that. They sometimes do that. So you need to take cognizance of that. Okay, 3.2, describe the responsibilities of the chief audit executive in managing the internal audit activity on a continuous basis for 6 months. Now, it has to do with topic number, it should be number 4. Let me show you. It has to do with this: establishing, administration and management of the internal audit activity. So who is responsible? Who has the overall responsibility for this? It's obviously the chief audit executive, right? So when I take you through topic number 4, I explain the details about that. I even have notes that I prepared in PowerPoint format and even in PDF where I explain about that. But for this discussion, I will not deal with this because my focus is only on the IPPF. Then in 3.3, they say provide the requirements for a quality assurance program in terms of the program, the assessments, and its reporting according to the IIA standards. This I can address with you guys. This has to do with standard 1300. So if you open your IPPF standards, you go to standard 1300, you will see something about this. But anyways, so this was just so that I can show you what is happening in question 3, but I'll come back to it. It will be the last point of departure. But question 4, and okay, let me just show you the scenario of question 3 first before we go to question 4. So here is what is happening there. In question 3, you are given or you're presented with the extract of the internal audit charter. Do you see there? for Magix Limited. So this is the charter. So they outlined what they are discussing in the charter, or what they've outlined in the charter. So they are dealing with the audit scope, organization, the responsibility of the internal audit function, the authority of the internal audit function. Yes, all of these, according to IIA standard 1000, purpose, authority, and responsibility of the internal audit activity should be defined there. But there are other aspects besides this, the audit scope, the organization, responsibility, and the authority. Besides that, there are other aspects that are supposed to be there, right? What are those? Just by looking at this, okay, there's nothing about the type of audit assignments that they'll be offering to the organization. I'm not seeing that outlined here. It's not there. So meaning to say, yes, they have an internal audit charter, but it's not adequate because there are certain things or aspects in the charter which should be present in the charter which are not defined. Okay, so but I'm going to come back to question 3, then we'll discuss on that. Now, question 4, I just want to show you something because it's going to be quicker to do question 4 before I switch to question 3. Question 4 looks very familiar. If you did AUI 3701 with UNISA, you are probably familiar with what is happening here. So in the required section, they say, please structure your answer as follows. So that is your starting point. So your answers should be presented in the 3-column format, where in 1 column, you are identifying the IPPF requirements that have been violated. In column number 2, you are explaining why it is a violation. And in column number 3, you are given the recommended corrective action by the chief audit executive or the internal auditor who is in violation. Okay, right. Very important. They give you an example here. Say if it's a code of ethics principle that has been violated, you indicate it to say code of ethics and then / principle of objectivity. Or if it's an IIA standard, here's what you do. You just state the standard, you quote the standard rather. So now mark allocations should also guide you guys. I can assure you for column 1, okay, you can probably get like 2 marks because there can be more than one IPPF requirement that has been violated. For column number 2, it can be 1 mark, and then for column, 2 marks here, and then for this one also probably 2 marks. So it just depends, but also sometimes this can be 1, this can be 2, but they've not necessarily specified it here in the table. So, but nonetheless, let's go through the individual case scenarios. Okay, before I take you to 4.1, let's go through what they've stated here at the top. So as an internal audit student, you are aware that the international professional practices framework for the internal auditors, which is the IPPF, consists of both the mandatory and recommended guidance, right? So from those videos that I've given you already in the group, I've explained about these things. So now we are applying them here. Consider the following independent scenarios. For each of these scenarios, indicate with which specific mandatory IPPF component have been violated. Please be specific in your answer as to exactly which element of the IPPF has been violated. For example, which core principle or international standard of the professional practice of internal auditing, or perhaps which principle of the IIA's Code of Ethics has been violated, something of that nature. Please note that in certain instances, more than one IPPF component has been violated. Therefore, you should quote all possible components of the IPPF that have been violated. Use the allocated marks to guide the extent of your response. So as I was saying that, okay, here they do not specify how much in terms of marks is being allocated to column 1, column 2, or column 3, but just by looking at the mark allocation, then we can be able to know to what extent should I give details in column 1, similar story to column 2, and likewise on the 3rd column as well. So let's have a look at 4.1 here. They're saying the chief audit executive for a very small internal audit department has been requested by management to what? To perform an audit of an extremely complex area in which neither the chief audit executive nor any of the internal auditors have the necessary expertise. However, the nature of the proposed audit engagement falls within the scope of the approved internal audit activities. Since management has requested that the audit engagement should be conducted in the near future due to the high level of risk involved, right? The chief audit executive, what did he do? He accepts the audit engagement, and what did they then do afterwards? They begin with the with the assessment immediately. Now, colleagues, I have a question for you. If you're looking at the first column, is there a violation based on what we've just read in this short brief scenario?
Yes.
There is. Can you see it? Tell me, what is that violation? Maybe just
Code of ethics.
the code of ethics.
Competence.
Right. Which principle?
Competence.
Competency has been violated, right? And if you want, but of course, in this case, they are kind of like not really explaining the rules of conduct according to the example they've given. But, you know, for the sake of helping you guys to understand this better, I summarize this with, what is it? I summarize this even using, what do you call it, man? Rules of conduct for the code of ethics principle. Okay, it looks like this one is not the one that I worked on. Let me see. This one is the one, right? So the code of ethics principle violated, yes, it's competency, right? And there's also the IPPF standard that has been violated there, which has to do with proficiency and due care. In my context, all right, the chief audit executive, first of all, we are told that they've received a request, but this request that they've received, they are not capacitated to actually perform that request that they've received from management. Although, according to the internal audit charter, it falls within their scope of coverage, right? So, but by accepting and commencing with this audit assignment, definitely the chief audit executive is violating this. Why are we quoting that they are violating A standard 1200 on proficiency and due care? And of course, the IPPF code of ethics principle competence, because they are not capacitated, the internal audit activity as a division, including the chief audit executive himself, they are not capacitated to perform this audit assignment in the complex audit area as emphasized. So that's what I can then be explaining or giving as part of the explanation to say the overall internal audit activity accepted an audit assignment to which they do not have the necessary expertise required to perform such a complex audit assignment. That's where the violation is. Accepting something that you're not capacitated to do or to offer, and then you commence with the assignment, right? So now, what is the corrective measure? If you look at the violation, all right, first of all, yes, we see that they are lacking the skill or the proficiency to perform the audit assignment. So as a way to correct, because already they've started with this audit assignment, because I'm told here they began with this assignment immediately. So what is the first thing that the chief audit executive should do? First of all, withdraw from proceeding with that engagement. That's the first thing that the chief audit executive has to do. Why? Because whatever they've already commenced with, it's not up to standard. Why? They are not capacitated to perform this duty, right? So it's not up to standard, and it will not help management to meet its objectives. Because whenever management requests you to audit something on their behalf, all right, they've got certain objectives that they want to achieve concerning their division. So if you're not capacitated to perform their request, how then can management be able to achieve their desired objective for their division? They won't. So the first thing here, the chief audit executive has to withdraw, all right, or refrain from proceeding with the audit assignment in this instant, and consider then outsourcing the service for this audit engagement and concern. Now, because we are considering the fact also that this engagement falls within the scope of the approved internal audit activities, what should the chief audit executive then do? For future purposes, because it's going to come again, most likely, for future purposes, the chief audit executive should ensure that the internal audit function undergoes professional development training within the complex audit area as it falls within their internal audit charter in place. Or yeah, what you could have said, like you could have said something like, as it falls within the scope of coverage scope of coverage in their internal audit charter. That's what you could have stated there. And then you get your 5 marks easy like that. Okay. I'm only going to do 2 for question number 4 for the interest of time, because I want us to deal with question 3, right? I'm only going to do 2 from here. The other ones, you can try to attempt them on your own. But I also have a recording where I've explained all 4 of them. I have a recording like that. So I'll do the honest to share it with you. right? In question 4.2, we are told that Arnold, a former employee in the payroll department, was transferred to the internal audit activity of the same organization a month previously. The chief financial officer of the organization has suggested that because of Arnold's immense knowledge in the area, it would be a good idea for him to undertake an internal audit engagement to evaluate the payroll department. The chief audit executive agrees, and Arnold immediately commences auditing the payroll, right? Before we can even talk about what principle of the code has been violated, what IPPF standard and all that has been effectively, by looking at just what is happening there from a practical point of view, right? You cannot self-review. Does it make sense? Especially when it comes to this. There's a risk of, it's a threat rather, but not in the complex of what we are dealing with in internal audit. I also teach external auditing, but just by looking at this, my thinking, just giving you a line of thought, this guy, if he's like already what is happening there, if he's to go, audit the payroll function, remember he was an employee, former employee there in the payroll department almost about a month ago. So now if you are assigned to audit somewhere where you were involved as an employee, it means there's self-review issues there. Does it make sense? Self-review issues. Because how can you audit yourself? You can't. You will not be independent and you will not be objective. Does it make sense, guys? Okay, think about it in this way. What if, let's just say for assumption's sake, what if this Arnold guy, he was performing some fraudulent activities and now he's assigned to audit this payroll department so that maybe they can uncover what could have resulted maybe in them exceeding their budgets, for example, right? So if he knows very well that he was not doing something right in that department, trust me, that objective assignment, the audit assignment, it will not be objective. They will not achieve the task at the end of the day. Why? Arnold will conceal whatever that he did as abuse of his company resources, okay? So, but now let's break it down in terms of the IPPF requirements violated, and then we explain why there's a violation, and then we give the recommended course of action. So in this case, both of the IPPF's requirements in terms of standards and the code of ethics have been violated. So in terms of the IPPF standards, it's the standard on independency and objectivity. Standards on independency and objectivity. I believe it should be standard 1200, I believe. So, and then the IIA code of ethics principle violated. The obvious one in this case is objectivity, okay? Now, why are we saying these are violations? Because there's been, or rather there have been, a deployment of an internal auditor to the payroll function to which he had been involved with about a month ago, and the chief audit executive is approved of it. That's why there's a violation. Then if I want to elaborate further, but now I'm looking at the mark allocation, this is just 4 marks. So I don't have to give too much information anyway. That's why you notice here I did not give other further points. There are other points I could have, emphasized, which still, seems to, to back up why we are saying there's a violation. Okay, another thing here, we can simply say that Arnold, since he was actively involved with the payroll department, there's self-review issues that may arise. Or there may be concealment, supposing Arnold was involved in any form of fraudulent activity. So you can also put that as part of the reasons in column number 2 here. Then what about the recommended action? What course of action should have been done? So obviously, because this guy, Arnold, has already been assigned to the audit, what should the chief audit executive do? All right, they should withdraw Arnold from proceeding with that assignment. That's number 1. And then do what? Deploy another independent internal auditor apart from Mr. Arnold to proceed with the audit of the payroll division. Why are we saying to proceed? Because obviously it's a request that has been brought to us by one of the the company stewards, this case the chief financial officer, so it ought to be attended to. So yeah, so the only thing that just has to happen is just reassignment of Mr. Arnold from that assignment, and then we deploy somebody else who is more independent within our team. That's what just the chief audit executive was supposed to have done here, right? So what about 4.3, 4.4? Okay, for this other one, 4.3, you can, do it on your own, but I want to take you back to question 3. Is it okay? But before I do so, is there anybody with questions pertaining to what I've just covered on question 4? Any questions? Hello? Okay, silence. I guess it presumes that there is no questions. Now let's come back to the real issue, which is on question 3, right? I'm going to read question 3.1 again. So they say scrutinize the chart to identify its deficiencies. With reference to the IPPF, you should specify the deficiency and explain why it is a shortcoming or why it is a deficiency. Where appropriate, in order to address the deficiencies, recommend improvements to the charter. Refer to the relevant IIA standards to justify the recommendation. Use the table format below to answer your question. I'm going to open the IIA standard. You'll find it in your study guide, by the way, which is this. So this is the AUI 2601, 4861 study guide. There is also an AUI 2601 study guide that you also need to make use of. Now, the one which I've made my notes on, it's the AUI 2601. So I've made my notes in terms of the IPPF standards. So just give me a minute, guys, to open it. Perfect. Right. Why I've opened it is because I've made summaries on footnotes and stuff on the IPPF standards in this study guide. So even if you notice my presentation in terms of the IPPF as a concept, there is a presentation, PowerPoint presentation that I've done already. I've summarized things like the definition of internal auditing in it. I've also summarized the IIA Code of Ethics. But for the standards, because there's so much there, all right, that you need to exhaust, I decided to just rather make footnote summaries from the study guide. So if you go to Learning Unit 7 in AUI 2601 study guide, that's where they deal with the IPPF standards in a greater detail. So I just opened it just as a point of reference to some of the things that I'll be pointing out from here. All right. So now let's go back to our question. Now, so let's go and look for those deficiencies, right, in the charter. So I'm going to read one by one. So for now, let's deal with the first one here, which has to do with the audit scope. In terms of this charter, the scope of activities of the internal audit activity is confined should I maybe start with you guys from the top? I don't know. Okay, maybe let me start with you from the top. So you see the type of organization you're looking at, and then how the chief audit executive in this case relates to the other parties. You are a newly appointed chief audit executive of Magix Limited, a large company listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Prior to your appointment as the chief audit executive, the following changes in management occurred and issues were brought to your attention. Number one, the previous chief executive officer resigned last year with new CEO only starting 2 months ago. Okay, so I'm seeing already change in prescribed officers. Number two, your predecessor, who was with the company for 10 years, resigned last year, leaving the position vacant for 6 months, meaning to say the previous chief audit executive. Notice he was with the company for 10 years. He resigned last year, leaving your position vacant for 6 months. So in other words, this is a listed company which did not have a chief audit executive for 6 months. There's a problem there. For those 6 months, they were not complying with the requirements of the Companies Act with respect to the internal audit activity. Anyways, the newly CEO informed you that the internal audit activities quality assurance program is basically non-existent. Okay, interesting. You need to determine what more is required for to further establish and manage the internal audit activity. No, so already by just reading what we are reading now, we can already pick up some problem areas, or should I say information of value that helps us to address the required part. Now it's also beginning to make sense to me. Okay. Besides the charter that they've asked about, it's beginning to make sense to me why they are asking you to describe the responsibility of the chief audit executive in managing the internal audit activity on a continuous basis. It makes sense now because look at the shuffle in prescribed officers that have taken place. Look also at the change of the chief audit executive position, seeing that the predecessor left the company and for 6 months there was no chief audit executive in place. Now it's making sense to me why they also are asking you guys to to answer something to do with the quality assurance program and address issues about the program itself. So there are two: there's internal and there's external quality assurance program, right? The assessments in terms of timelines, the first one, the internal one, it has to be done once every year. The external quality assurance happens once every 5 years. So I'm also beginning to question myself, in those 10 years when that previous chief audit executive was in place, were they even revising? Were they even performing any external quality assurance programs in the first place or not? Right. So, but in any case, I'm just trying to show you how some of this information from the scenario links to the required section. That's what I'm trying to emphasize or to show you. Now, you were presented with the current internal audit charter for your review, right? So this is what they currently have. Let me just highlight this. So this is what they currently have, right? So this has been presented to you for your review prior to approval by the audit committee. So in other words, what they presented to you, it's what was structured as what I would call a draft internal audit charter. Why am I saying draft? Because it is subject for approval by the audit committee. The only time it's established, that is if it has been approved by the audit committee. But in this case, it seems like it hasn't yet passed that stage. So let's see now. First point, it has to do with the audit scope. In terms of this charter, the scope of activities of the internal audit activity is confined to, right? Number 1.1, reviewing the reliability and integrity of financial and operating information, as well as the means used to identify, measure, classify, and report such information. Okay, that's financial audits, right?
Sorry, sir. We have got 2 minutes left on the meeting.
Oh, yes, yes.
Maybe we could start again.
We have to. I'm realizing for us to really exhaust it properly, I have to reconnect with you guys again. So let me just let me start. That will be part C of this discussion, so that at least there is value. Is it okay, guys? I would maybe take you for the next 30 minutes. Within 30 minutes, I'll be done discussing this part of the question. I'm just trying to do it for the sake of ensuring that there is value with regards to what we wanted to discuss on that note. So let me end it and then